I want to start, though, by something that may be a little strange to some people. I want to reclaim Christopher Columbus. I mean, as Joe said, one shouldn't vilify the man. In a strange sort of way, if you look at the period at which, 1492, as we call it, it's one of those dates that hang like 9/11 will hang. Was an enormously interesting and important time because at one level, things were happening on the peripheries of civilization. I mean, what was Spain in 1492? It was Nowheresville. It wasn't the center or the capital of a great empire. It was the extreme edge of the Muslim empire. And so it was the boundary, as far as the Muslim world was concerned, of civilization. The periphery, so to speak, in modern terms. And what you had in 1492 was the victory of Ferdinand and Isabella over the last Muslim kingdom in Spain. If you think about it, it was actually an anti-imperial war that they were fighting against these Muslims that had come and taken over Spain and had ruled it for several hundred years. Now, Ferdinand and Isabella's armies won, and what they did was that they basically expelled the Muslims and the Jews, and they were forced to convert or die. And it was then that they told Christopher Columbus, off you go. I mean, the poor man had been trying for years to get support and got nowhere, but it was only with the victory over the last Muslim kingdom that they said, okay, off you go. Now, when you read Christopher Columbus's own account of what he was setting out to do, it's actually very instructive. One of the things he says is that he's off, as he says, to see those princes and peoples and lands. To see those princes and peoples and lands. In other words, he's going to look for people who at one level he thinks as civilizational equals. That like his prince, there would be princes. Like his people, there would be people. And then he goes on, and the manner which should be used to bring about their conversion to our holy faith. So he's not just going to go and see them, he's actually going to go and try and convert them. I think, to me at least, an important part of that dynamic was that the expansion of Spain was part of a sense of triumph and of the possibility of having their own empire, which had grown because they had lived in the shadow of a previous empire. I think when you actually look back at imperial history, you find this over and over and over again. Empires grow in the shadow of previous empires. A few years after Christopher Columbus goes off, King Manuel of Portugal sends Vasco da Gama the other way also to find India. And Vasco da Gama actually finds India. But when you look to see what happened in both places, at one level the outcomes are profoundly different. With the Spanish going to the New World and the Portuguese going to India. One, you see devastation on an epical scale. On the other, you see the Portuguese trading and working and settling. India survived that encounter. But when you pay attention to the details, there are interesting similarities that emerge that tell us important things about empire. One of those is that there was an enormous amount of collaboration and cooperation with these new people that came. Because Joe mentioned translators. There was, in both the encounter with the New World and the encounter with India, there were people who played roles as interpreters, as translators, as mediators, as people who explained their society to these new people. This is who we are. This is what we value. This is what we think. And the elites in these societies, in the New World and in India, thought that they could use these new people who had come as part of their own local political power struggles. The simple notion of empire, that this is military force that goes out and conquers other places and loots and pillages, well, of course there's an element of truth in it. But it's not so simple. So one question to ask is that, what is empire? I mean, there's a lot of talk about empire, but what is it? And I think one of the definitions that I found that captures some of this slightly more complicated business, rather than just the use of brute force and overwhelming technology or whatever it happens to be, is one offered by Michael Doyle. He wrote this very good book called Empires, which looks at the characters of empires from early times basically up to the present. I mean, he kind of stops when he gets to the United States. The final chapter, he kind of says, well, you know, is it an empire, isn't it not? Is it a hegemon? It's an interesting notion, you know. Suddenly, other people have been empires, but we're only a hegemon. Or they were empires, we're a superpower. You know, so, you know, but it tells you something that, for some people at least, there's still a resonance as to that there's something bad about this. But Doyle offers as a definition that empire is a relationship, formal or informal, in which one state controls the effective political sovereignty of another society. And Doyle goes on. It can be achieved by force, by political collaboration, by economic, social, or cultural dependence. Now, there are lots of important things for me packaged into that definition, because it does stress that it's a relationship. It's not one set of people doing something to somebody else. And it teases out some of the important characteristics of that relationship. Now, with the Bush administration, right, nobody here has any doubts about it, but when you read their own documents, like the National Security Strategy of the United States that was released in 2002 in September, you just don't have to read that much between the lines to see how they've embraced all the things that Doyle points at without using the word. So the National Security Strategy, for example, says, the United States possesses unprecedented and unequaled strength and influence in the world. So not only does that say we can do what we want, but it draws a distinction between strength and influence. Then it says, this is a time of opportunity for America. So not only can we be imperial, but you know, we can do this. And it says, we will work to translate this moment of influence into decades of peace, prosperity, and liberty. We forget the last three words. I mean, they all claim this, right? But A, they recognize this is a moment of influence, because some of them know that, you know, empires grow in the shadow of other empires. This will not last. And so how are they going to build in the advantage that the United States has right now? And the last bit is my favorite bit, actually. It says, the aim of this strategy, the national security strategy of the United States, you know, is to help make the world not just safer, but better. Now, you know, to me, that says it all in terms of, you know, the kind of notions, that self-notion, because people who write these documents, which come with a big kind of American seal on the front, know that most ordinary people will never read them. So it's not propaganda in that sense. This is what they write to each other. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, you know, part of the things that has unleashed this particular moment of, you know, fantasizing about empire and what they can do, because if you look, empire is doing actually quite badly. The Afghans will not give in, even though we liberated them from the awful Taliban, right? And the Iraqis are being positively unkind. right? You know, even the people we handpick to put on their governing council, right, now say, well, it feels like we're under a foreign occupying power.